I am an ethnomusicologist from outer space, a Black one planted into the margins of Tallahassee's fertile soil. My skin is black, hair shining a coily brown, and it locks together with a twist of my finger. But when the light is right, you might see my eyes glow purple. And I can assure you, I am not from Mars. A white man named Nettle did not write about me. I am born in the way that Ashenafi Kebita lived, and the way that the rest of my Black ethnomusicological ancestors lived. And just so you're sure, know that it's our rage, our isolation, and our grief that birthed us. But I invite you all into a moment of witnessing my story, a last-ditch excursion into my own musical heartland as it lies desolate and burning. What I will share with you are 3 stories of failed attempts at anti-racist alliance. You're hearing them, and attending to them will grant you but a taste of sonic anti-Blackness. What does it mean to build anti-racist coalition with non-Black students? One of the things that frustrates me is knowing the courage it takes to call people in and having to deal with their fragility, their inability to stomach the hurt they cause, to confront the violence of their own anti-Blackness. It's often documented in defense. Some sound like good deeds from a mixed race cis woman, a Palestinian and white music educator. In June, when I asked her about her silence around Black Lives Matter on my Facebook timeline, she told me, people feel like they're just talking to the world from some sort of pedestal without really doing much to make change. Have they started food banks in poor communities? Have they organized donations and written grants for nonprofits? Have they experienced homelessness? I don't need to make some post on Facebook so my friends know where I stand. But maybe where you stand doesn't matter if you've never had an honest online relationship with your Black students. What this pandemic has taught us is that the wave of pedagogical futures exists in a hybrid of face-to-face and online interactions. I was heartbroken by the lack of response from my former orchestra directors, teaching supervisors, and private instructors about anti-Black racism. And no, their courtesy check-in during the first 2 weeks of June does not count. If you know the power you have within a music community, why can't you align your anti-racist thoughts in all social spaces? You claim to champion the teaching and the inclusion of all musics, but what does it mean to be a music educator who denounces anti-Blackness, but only in private? To be a mixed-race music educator who surely can pass as white, and then build ties to an overwhelmingly white music community in the US South because of that fact. Do your non-Black student musicians back the boys in blue? Is that what makes it okay for you to make up an excuse like, I created a food bank in the heart of downtown, so I need not mention the murders of people whose skin happens to be dark brown? My life is too precious. The threats are too urgent to remain obtuse about protecting your well-meaning intentions, however concealed or complicated by a mixed-race identity. So I pull you aside, initiating a moment of allyship, only to be left asking, what's the use? I often wonder about paths that never existed, a moment in which I was able to break down the empathetic barrier between my white woman professor and me. How would it have felt to witness a trauma hip-hop scholar reckoning with the reality that her teaching reproduces that very trauma within her only Black student? Hoping to reveal our profession's colonial force field, she willed it unintentionally by shifting the course calendar to front-load my Black History Month with ethnographic Black pain. I thought I'd be welcome to come into her office and state how the readings are wounding my bodily psyche. I unknowingly poisoned myself into believing her sharing her personal copy of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me was concrete evidence of a blossoming interracial mentorship, one grounded in anti-racist pedagogy, Black studies, and sound scholarship. My reality was that of a misinformed Black woman student with post-racial fantasies, feeding my starved scholarly being with hollow seminar discussions. My peers' newly minted awareness and subsequent frustration with the realities of homeless Black girls, so eloquently portrayed by Amy Meredith Cox, shifted uneasily in my stomach. I would later give that feeling in my gut a name: fury. There were times I went to my professor's office ready to be racially vulnerable, to share my discomfort with her in hopes that she'd recognize the seminar's toll on my weary spirit. I wanted for my words to solicit a kind of emotional harm reduction, if you will. But in that moment, I received tears, hot ones that sear her mascara and fudge her foundation, bearing witness to white guilt, I wonder, and ever so quietly, my resolute words leave me. They fade into the ether of my cowardice. My tears bellow in their ducts, and through sheer will, I control them, and not one is allowed to spill until I am in a space of safety. Far away from her, now I feel betrayed by my own body, an internalized white supremacist guilt trip. In me was an age-old Black bodily panic response to white women's tears. It leapt out in protection of me, and I am grateful for it. I consider myself one of the lucky ones to have lived to tell my tale. Have you ever witnessed sonic minstrelsy in real time? On hollowed stages normally reserved for keynote addresses? I have. And if you attended the 2019 Seeger Lecture at the annual meeting of the Society for Ethnomusicology, you did too. Whether you recognized it at that time or not, a conversation between a non-Black scholar and his musician friend was the opening of a vortex which transformed the stage at Indiana University and all of us as onlookers into patrons of a modern day minstrel show. A Black Afrofuturist musical master and a white percussionist are bound together in a sick centering of whiteness. The latter party shamelessly flaunts his access to George Clinton. A storied 9 minutes passes by recounting the senseless shaking of a tambourine in the studio with a Funkadelian. His strange dress is the butt of sarcastic phrasing. I mean, George, look at what you're wearing. He gestures downward with his hand. Certainly, your Balinese and neurodiverse interlocutors are impressed in this manner. No, it's just the standard of how to treat an iconic Afrofuturist wearing cosmologies of his creation like an S on his chest. Ask him whether or not he's heard of John Cage in order to get more philosophical, because George Clinton's music is surely just for shits and giggles, good times and high minds. No one asks themselves, did I just witness anti-Black pedagogy? But is this how he represents Black music and interacts with Black students in the classroom? Could it be that no one saw this coming? Could it be that no one wondered what the aftermath would be like for his Black students who would return to Tallahassee on the same flight with Clinton? Maybe the Black senior scholars' hearts were hardened, having been broken by the society again and again. So when they receive a call from the perpetrator, perhaps their words flow smooth like absolution, a consolation prize. Perhaps that's why the gaslighting that would come from fellow students, those present and those not, felt so familiar to me. I sit through denials from POC, Latinx, adjunct faculty to white tenured music professors to white upper-level music administrators and private meetings, and it all sounds the same. That's just the way he is. I've known him for years. He planned for that event as best he could. I can assure you he didn't intend this kind of harm, Danielle. No one thought about the violent pitfalls of how Black students get caught up in the campaign of white male virtue signaling and his colleagues' complicity in that act. And now I'm just a lost Black graduate student, a brown-skinned alien whose ethnomusicological self has been laid to rest. Cause of death, a bludgeoning by pervasive ethnomusicological anti-Blackness at every turn. When I imagine empathetic futures of coalition, I dream of a solidarity free of white fragility and tears. Non-Black teachers and students must learn to hold them in, to swallow and save them for later, so that their non-Black peers can share in the processing and releasing of their guilt. So I won't have to bear the brunt of their emotional labor. So I might taste the sweetness of being able to fully rest, trusting my non-Black peers and professors to get it right the first time, for them to hear my screams and my nonverbal cries in the moment that their subtle silences and violences commit against me the very first crime. I pray we sit in agreement at this discomfort, to partake in sacred vows to move us forward without burdening Black beings who look and sound like me, to do the work of correcting those who harm us in the act, not long after the fact. I am an ethnomusicologist surviving on a lonely, cold planet. I mourn my musicological heartland from far out into the othered outer space. I'm searching for the warmth of other scholarly suns, for a new time and place where Black aliens like me are wholly and honorably embraced. I cry, I sing, I laugh, I strive, I learn. And I know that I'm still just the alien here, shrinking into oblivion, morphing like all my Black peers, and planetary ethno and music and collegiate departments in order to ease your anti-Black fears. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that incredible talk, Danielle. And currently we're running low on time. So if anyone, we can maybe get one question in. So if anyone has one, please ask away. But if not, we also have the opportunity to ask more questions towards the end when all the panelists are on screen. So yes, if not, then why don't we switch over to the next speaker. So thank you again, Danielle. That was really wonderful.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. I just want to say and just like acknowledge that moment and what happened there, because I was actually wanting, I knew I was going to go over, but I felt like my words and what I had to share with everyone was far more important. While I appreciate Vivian saying, you know, she appreciated what I shared, there was a moment, there was an opportunity for her to create space for me. And that didn't happen. And I'm not really familiar with this program, Project Spectrum, this group and this community, but I see that there is really great work and conversations that are happening here. And so I think it's important that I say that because I've spent many years not advocating for myself. And I appreciate everyone who was in the comments that were, who recognized that moment for what it was, especially with me being a Black woman scholar, the darkest person on this program today, and how easily my time and my being was erased.
Thank you for that. And I do apologize for what happened. That's really all I can say, but I will jump straight into the questions. And we currently have one. So thank you, Danielle, for a beautifully written, vulnerable, and so much needed paper. And I empathize with the intense hurt. I would like to ask if you have shared this work with student colleagues and professors at your institution, and if so, how they received it. Does anyone there support this work, this anti-racist poetic position's approach to scholarship explicitly?
The only person who saw what I shared with you all today was my advisor, Panagiotis League, and another scholar at UGA. I do not, after SEM last year, I separated myself from the Society of Musicology at FSU because of the gaslighting. And they did not know that there was a reason why I was doing that until another student and I made an effort to say, we're bringing in Black scholars and you are gaslighting us, and you guys don't understand what that moment was. I'm an Afrofuturist. I study the music of Pharrell Williams and Tyler, the Creator, people who have directly benefited from George Clinton's music, who position themselves as monsters and Martians, as Black artists. And so I think it's really important that people understood what that moment was. But it's hard because I know everybody is learning and they're at their own, pace. So there were people there that were just awestruck by him. And so that it becomes, yes, Alex, Igor does slap. But it becomes such a big thing where your blinders are on, the celebrity in the moment. But these people were in class with me and have seen how these conversations flow, and they couldn't even recognize the racism that was right in their face, the anti-Blackness that was in their face. So it's just been it's been rough. I'm sure people on the back end are starting to really hear me, but that was something that I recognized. It took 3 years for me to really be heard and to be seen. And even still, sometimes I wonder to what degree that happens.
Thank you. We have another question, and this is from Alex. Do you think there is any realistic situation in which a non-BIPOC, non-queer, etc. person can research and or teach concepts that generally deal with marginalized narratives? In other words, could a cishet white male ever teach or research minority stories?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I do think that it can happen, but there's always going to be this opportunity for a form of minstrelsy to happen, for power dynamics to be reinforced, and so I think it's important that people really do that self and that emotional work of recognizing that they just cannot access things in the same way that I do as someone who is researching music about Black people, being a Black person. But I also recognize that as playing I play Middle Eastern music and I teach an Arabic music ensemble. And I'm very, very careful, very cautious about making sure that I interrogate every step of the way, what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and how I'm learning the music and the culture so that I'm not reproducing those sorts of inequalities or inequities. I hope that answers the question.
There is another question, and we can keep taking more when we bring everyone else onto the virtual stage. And They ask, in what ways do you keep yourself intact and whole?
That is a really good question. For a while, I was very depressed, and so I was also recommended by the scholar, my professor, who I mentioned in the second narrative, to go to counseling. So that's been the best thing for me at this point in time. I take a lot of baths. I'm really good at doing like a spiritual bath. And I watch a lot of, I guess, kind of like sci-fi stuff. I've really been getting in my Afrofuturist bag, but like right now I've been doing some things with like Lovecraft Country, and being able to make sure that I'm able to take care of myself, whether that is doing yoga or, you know, meditating and spending time with loved ones and with friends outside in nature, whatever.